particular interesting moment in 2006. Now, I had wanted to organize a fertilizer summit in Africa. And the reason was I woke up one morning, I had worked under John Sanders, and we were looking at the time at the use of inorganic fertilizer and how little that amount was. But when I became, in Rockefeller Foundation, I said, but look, we've got to be able to make sure that the level of use of fertilizer in Africa, on average, can move from 8 kilograms per hectare to something at least 50 kilograms per hectare to give us a chance to be able to feed ourselves. But at that time, all the NGOs were saying, well, fertilizers are bad, they're bad for the environment, they're bad for water, overused during the Asian Green Revolution, blah, 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 blah. But I said, well, look, it was not the overuse of fertilizers that was Africa's problem. It was the lack of use of fertilizer that was Africa's problem. But I needed to get the political leaders to get to. So I went out to mobilize actually literally the world behind that in Africa. And I went to Dr. Bollock. And I said, Dr. Bollock, I would like you to help me with this. And he agreed to be on the committee to organize this landmark event. So we went to New York. I was at the Rockefeller Foundation. We're walking on Fifth Avenue. And Dr. Bollock, he was 90 years old. And he put his hand around my shoulder. And he said, Akin, do you play soccer? And I wondered, why in the world will he be asking me about soccer? And I said, yes, I play soccer. He said, you see, in soccer, unless you score the first goal, you will never have the confidence that you can win the match. And he said, well, I wanted to go score the first goal for African agriculture. And so for me, it was like a call. It was so spiritual. It was like, wow, this is the man who was the Nobel Prize winner, a man who fed 1 billion people, tapping me on the shoulder and telling me I should go do something. Then this is it. So anyway, we went over there to Nigeria. We organized the Fertilizer Summit under President Obasanjo of Nigeria at the time. But the thing with Nom was that he did things in extraordinary ways. So we had all these heads of state, 40 heads of state and government. And Dr. Bollock walks up to the front of the stage, and he said, I don't need all of you to change Africa. I don't even need 20 of you. I don't need 10 of you. I only need 2 of you. And then he banged the lecture. He said, I want to see the real revolution in Africa before I die. He was now 92. And President Obasanjo of Nigeria got out of his seat, ran straight to the lectern where he was, but he forgot his shoes. And so his security detail ran after him, thinking the president was crazy. And got to the front, and then he held Dr. Bollock's hand and said, to all the heads of state, Dr. Bollock has been telling us that we've got to get a green revolution going in Africa. We were not listening to him. Now Dr. Bollock is threatening us with death. And nobody wants to be responsible for killing Dr. Bollock. So all of you in favor of a motion to adopt the African Green Revolution, put your hands up, and all the hands went up. That was how Dr. Bollock got us to approve the African Green Revolution at the Africa Fertilizer Summit. I miss Dr. Bollock, but there's a part of him that's inside of me. Yeah. The commitment to what he actually stood for. And I have every confidence that by God's grace, we'll be able to feed Africa. It was the last thing on Dr. Bollock's mind, how to feed Africa. He doesn't have to worry. By God's grace, we'll get it done.
Well, let's talk about getting it done. You're the point person for this, as much as anyone on the planet. And talk about the state of the effort to eliminate hunger and malnutrition in Africa, and in particular about the bank's so-called High Fives program to address it.
It is actually quite mind-boggling that Africa is not able to feed itself. And for me, it's certainly not acceptable at all. Because I think God has given Africa all it needs. We've got lots of land, lots of cheap labor. We've got lots of water. And we got great sunshine. Right? We don't have snow. Just a fantastic place. But I think the problem has always been the way in which we looked at agriculture. So I'm starting from the point of, if we're going to do that, we have to change the lenses with which we look at agriculture. We were looking at agriculture as that primary sector. Even the economic theory, they would teach you that agriculture is that primary sector that you want to really focus onto your industrial sector and move folks out of agriculture into that sector. As a result of that, African governments wanted to start building planes, aircrafts, and they forgot all about agriculture. So the first thing for me that I decided to do was to help African governments to understand that agriculture is a business. It's not a social sector. It's not a development activity. It is a business. It's a private enterprise. Every farmer you see is a private enterprise person. But the key is, how do you unbound the constraints around them in terms of access to good technology, to information, to markets, to all the things that they need to be able to thrive. And so I think that a number of things are important. I really believe that the technologies to feed Africa, they are there right now. The problem in Africa is not lack of technology. It's that those technologies need to be taken to scale of millions of farmers. So at the African Development Bank, when I became president, we launched a strategy, which is to feed Africa, and we are going to be investing $24 billion US in the agriculture sector over the next 10 years. And we just, in front of our board right now, going to our board to consider an initiative that's called Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation. Essentially what it is we're going to take the technologies. Right here at Purdue, you have a great technology with the Purdue PICS, you call it, the improved storage systems here. But that technology, or the extruder that is being worked on here, can go to scale of millions of farmers, right? So what we're trying to do is, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Rockefeller Foundation, and AGRA, where I used to work, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, want to take technologies to scale of millions of farmers. That's the first part. The second part is we've got to unlock the potential of Africa's savannas. You were saying, President, just a while ago about the potential Africa has. Dr. Bullock used to say, potential is important. But they don't serve it on the menu. There's nobody eats potential. You have to unlock the potential. Africa has, you won't believe, a mind-boggling 600 million hectares of land in the savannas. 400 million hectares of that is actually cultivated. But we only cultivate 10% of that, which is 40 million hectares. The savannas of Africa are not different from the cerrados of Brazil. And in fact, it's better than the cerrados of Brazil, because the cerrados of Brazil were acidic soils, so you had to add a lot of lime to reclaim them. So if we can unlock the potential of Africa's savannas, I believe that not only can Africa feed itself, Africa can contribute to also feeding the world. The third part of it is what you do with a lot of things. We are number one in sorghum production, in millet production, in cocoa production, in kola nut production, in big cooking banana production. We're number one in so many things. But we export raw materials, raw commodities. And I tell you, President Daniels, for me, the secret of the wealth of nations is very clear. The nations that are very rich are the ones that process and add value to oil and gas, minerals, and services. The ones that are poor are the ones that export raw materials. So I want African countries not to be at the bottom of the value chain. I want them to be at the top of the value chain for the things they have comparative advantage. So process and add value to them. Now let me just see in this hall, by a show of hands, how many of you like chocolates? Oh, great. That's fantastic. Great. How many of you know that Africa is why you have chocolates? Not many, you see. Actually, 75% of all the cocoa produced in the world comes out of Africa. And Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana alone account for 65% of it. And so the key is, what's the brain surgery in making chocolates? Well, we export raw chocolates. The size of the chocolate industry is $100 billion a year. Africa gets 2% of that. Recently, when the price of chocolates, of cocoa declined, Cote d'Ivoire lost $1 billion, Ghana lost $1 billion, but the chocolate manufacturing companies were declaring all-time profits. Right? So what I'm saying by that is Africa must process, industrialize agriculture, and add value to everything that it produces. The last point I want to make about how to unlock this potential is just the number of young people we have. Africa today is the youngest country. You've got about 420 million people, young people, between the ages of 12 and 35. By 2030, or 2050 actually, that will go to 840 million people, young people. But they don't find jobs. They don't get jobs. And so we face a major problem with a big demographic shift, but without our ability to create jobs for us. And I think agriculture is the coolest thing you ever find. Agriculture is cool. When I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, even now as President of the African Development Bank, I want people to understand that agriculture is really sexy, it's very cool, it's the coolest thing that you can have, and we're getting young people into agriculture as a business. Because when they do, they will bring new technology, they will bring innovation, they will bring entrepreneurship, and they will make Africa to be a leading player in the global food and agriculture industry. So that was giving me confidence.
In addition to your the great reputation you have built as an economist and as an analyst, and how to move your continent ahead for, economically, you've also built a reputation for integrity and for someone who is intolerant of corruption and has dealt with it effectively in many, many places where it has been a serious inhibitor of progress on the continent. Can you talk a little about this, and how can the bank, how can your new, the tools you have in your new position enable you to help reduce the burden of corruption that's too often afflicted African countries?
Yeah, the monies of countries, all the resources of countries, don't belong to individuals. They belong to the collective. They belong to the country. And so probity, accountability, and transparency in the management of public resources is very critical. Africa is not a poor continent at all. Africa just happens to have a lot of poor people. That's because the resources are well managed. And so, for example, when I was Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, I got in there and I found a really terribly corrupt fertilizer sector, which for decades, more than 40 years, the governments have been buying fertilizers and distributing fertilizers to farmers. But only 11% of the farmers ever got the fertilizers bought and sold by government. And so a lot of rent-seeking behavior in it. I know that fertilizer is, you have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But in the case of Nigeria at the time, the fertilizers actually had hands and legs. They could walk. Just walked away. And so I figured what was the way in which we would use disruptive innovation to end corruption in this sector. And, we began to use the power of the mobile phones. And so I started by saying, if you cannot register your farmers, you don't know your customer, and you're in a business, you're in a bad business. So we started Africa's first major effort to have biometric information on farmers, register them, know who they are, know where they are. And I turned to the power of the mobile phones then to say, well, I can send electronic vouchers of subsidies to the farmers directly. Why do I need an intermediary between government and the farmer? And so we began to send electronic vouchers, subsidized vouchers to farmers via the mobile phones. And in 4 years, we reached over 15 million directly via the mobile phones. It cut off all the middlemen. I woke up one morning and I told the whole country, effective from now, the seed companies, fertilizer companies, you will not sell any more to government. If I can find Pepsi-Cola and soda water in a village and it's not sold by government, why can't I find seed and fertilizer in the same village, not sold by government? So we inverted it completely. And I can tell you it was a powerful thing. One of the things that really, for me, was the gender aspect of ending that corruption. We ended a corruption of 40 years. It took us exactly 90 days to do that. And I remember my wife telling Grace, I said, Grace, I'm doing this thing. I'm not sure how long I'm going to be alive for to do this. Because I told the president of the country that we're not just going to be walking on people's toes or stepping on people's toes. That we have to be walking on people's heads. Because it's a big friend of mine asked, how good is your security? But I think I had God for protection. So we were able to do that. But I was saying about the women, the gender part of it. I walked to the north of Nigeria, where we were having a lot of insecurity. And I went to this irrigated perimeter. There were all these women in black order. They were rushing towards where I was. And so my security staff got scared because we were having terrorist attacks in the north of the country. And they said, well, let's just whisk you off. I said, I'm very comfortable on farmers' fields. They call me farmers minister. I was very comfortable. I didn't feel threatened, just leave me there. All of a sudden, the women got to where we were, and they were all in this black powder. They put their hands into their pockets. They took their hands out, and out came the cell phones. And they said, Minister, we want to thank you because we get our fertilizer and seeds now in the village, and the men can't cheat us anymore. And I was like, wow. So I really think that it's really important. And today, that same technology, we at the African Development Bank, we're scaling it up into 30 countries. Afghanistan, there was a student from Purdue University, I don't know who was the professor he worked with, but he was from Afghanistan. And he had looked at that system in Nigeria. And when he went back to Afghanistan, he actually wrote me and said, well, I want to use this system in Afghanistan. And so this year, the World Bank is taking the same electronic wallet system that helped to develop to Afghanistan to be used for 1 million farmers this year. So that tells you how much transparency that brought. But talking of transparency, I think the critical issue is sometimes people think the corruption is one way. But I find that corruption has a demand side, it has a supply side as well. So if you deal with demand side of corruption, you've got to also deal with the supply side of corruption. What I mean by that is that the multinational institutions, multinational companies, sometimes they have tax lawyers more than a whole country has. So when it comes to gold, diamonds, oil, gas, negotiation, there's an asymmetry of power in negotiation. So the people just sign away papers, but they sign away, assets of the country for a long time. So the African Development Bank has something called the African Legal Support Facility, which we deploy to help countries to either negotiate current contracts in terms of taxes and royalties, or renegotiate the bad stuff that you've actually gotten yourself into. We just did that for Guinea-Bissau, and we saved them over 96% of their debt just by helping them to renegotiate a lot of things. So we have that facility that we do. The other thing that we do is that I think the illicit capital flows out of Africa is mind-boggling. Africa loses today over $60 billion a year from illicit capital flows. So I think being able to monitor that, being able to have stiff penalties for companies that extract without paying what they should be paying back is the key. And also just getting civil society involved for the citizens to be able to know, how much resources they have, how is their money being used is a very big, big thing. Of course, one of the things with corruption is that if you let people get away with it, they'll do it again. So I think there has to be a very high bar of punishment for those that misuse resources for state, because it's actually worse than murder, because it's the resources that you send kids to school, fund hospitals, that people just soak it away like that. So I really think that for the African Development Bank, transparency, accountability is very important. E-governance is a very good way that citizens actually know what's really going on. So at the bank, we're doing quite a lot to help to improve the management of Africa's resources in a more transparent manner.
Just a fascinating story. Congratulations on the progress. We're about to go in a moment to questions from the audience. We're going to start with 4 students who earned the right to be here through their scholarship, but then the rest of you can be thinking about questions you might like to ask. Let me just ask you then one more before we go to the floor. You just talked about the security problems that are still prevalent in some parts of the continent, and we do read heartbreaking stories about warfare and even genocide. Are there things the bank can do over the course of time, you think, to bring peace to these areas so that they can participate in the progress too? Or do you just have to work in the peaceable places and hope that some other agency or entities will finally bring some calm conditions?
Yeah, President, this is one aspect that actually always breaks my heart in development, because I think fragility is something that we all have to take very, very seriously. And to recognize that fragility is not a permanent state. Even a seemingly peaceful country can be fragile. Even a giant can have a bit of play. Take my country, Nigeria. We suddenly have a terrorist attack all in the north of the country. You look at Kenya, that has been doing very well in terms of economic growth rates, having terrorists in the north of the country as well. So what we try to do as African Development Bank is to help countries to build more resilient economies. Because if the economies aren't growing very well, and you have high levels of inequality, then you have a lot of problems that leads to instability. One of the success stories in Africa, actually, maybe 2, is to look at Rwanda. Rwanda was in a race genocide situation, and Rwanda is a poster country for Africa in terms of how the economy has roared back. The other one the bank invested heavily in is Cote d'Ivoire, where the headquarters of the bank really is. They went into war, they came out of war, and today, Cote d'Ivoire's GDP growth rate is about 8.2%, one of the highest you have in the world. And so, what I'm trying to say by that is that it's important to build very strong institutions. It's important also to have strong macroeconomic management to make sure that the countries can have robust growth, because without growth you can't distribute anything. And so I think that's one area that we invest quite a lot in. But I'm bothered about 3 factors. Whenever you find these 3 factors, you always have terrorists. Everywhere. And that is what I call disaster triangle. That is high level of unemployment in the rural areas among the youth. High extreme level of rural poverty, and also areas of climate and environmental degradation. Whenever you find these 3 factors, it's almost a perfect correlation with you're going to have terrorists there. Now, so when we want to think of how we help to bring security, we should think beyond just, let's send a bunch of Apache helicopters around to help deal with that. We've got to deal with problems at the root. So we have to create jobs for the young people, right? Otherwise, the terrorists just recruit them easily. I'll give you one example, and it's a real-life example. There's a young guy in a country I will not mention, but it's in the Sahel, one of the Sahelian countries. Went looking for a job, couldn't get a job. Went to the first place, they told him, well, sorry, you don't have the qualification. Went to the second place, they say you don't have the qualification. So he walked into a store, trying to work in a bakery actually. And they say, look, sorry, we can't hire you because we don't have space to hire somebody else in the bakery. So the guy who was listening in on the conversation, and he said, you're looking for a job? We can hire you and give you a job. So the guy got excited. And we don't even need qualifications for the job. So he said, what kind of job is it? He said, we recruit terrorists. We try to get young people into that. So what I'm saying is that if we don't create a lot of jobs for young people, it will worsen social, economic, and political fragilities in our countries. And that's why at the African Development Bank, we've launched a major effort, which is called Jobs for Africa's Youth. It's to help to create 25 million jobs in Africa over the next 10 years and impact about 50 million young people. We focus on the ICT industry, small and medium-sized enterprises, and of course, on agriculture. So I think that this is a very, very important area when it comes to dealing with the issue of insecurity. The last thing I want to say about insecurity is what has happened with the issue of conflict and women in particular. Because at the end of the day, when you have all these insecurities, the women and the kids that suffer the most. You have a rising refugee population. As a result of that, in many of our countries, you have a lot of stunting, you have a lot of problem from malnutrition because of lack of enough food. So I think that to have development, or to have, let me say, a green revolution that we were talking about, you have to sow the seeds of that on ridges of peace. So you have to really invest a lot in strong institutions, reduce inequalities, create a lot of jobs. And maybe if I can add one more thing, it's electricity. When I came here to the United States, one of the lovely people here who took me in from the airport, to welcome grad students and international students, was a family, Chris and Barbara Melby. He was a professor in nutrition, human nutrition department. So I stayed in their home for about 3 weeks. And I remember my first day, I took out all my clothes and I began to iron them. I spent over an hour trying to do that. And Barbara came to me and said, well, you've been ironing for an hour. Why? I said, because they might just take the electricity off at any time. And she said, in the United States, they don't ever take electricity off. They say there's a crisis or something. For me, that was strange. I was from Nigeria, And the point I'm making is that today you have 645 million Africans that don't have access to electricity. And so when you don't have electricity, you can't even use drones to trace terrorists, right? And so the terrorists prosper where it's dark, right? And so I think that we've got to link universal access to electricity to how we also deal with the issue of the conflict. So as a bank, we are investing $12 billion in the energy sector over the next 5 years to try and mobilize, we're going to mobilize $45 to $50 billion from the private sector because we must have universal access to electricity for everything. What can you do without power? You can't develop in the dark, So I think these are all very much related items that if you have them and people feel the quality of life has improved, I think you'll be able to reduce the amount of conflicts that we actually have.
It's wonderful. We have two doctoral candidates with us, each from Nigeria, and each, I hope, prepared with a question. Kenneth, would you go first?
Thank you, President, for the opportunity. And on behalf of the Nigerian graduate students, I want to congratulate our award for